right, welcome back everyone to another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. Last week we chatted with our very own Amanda's husband all about we had such a genuine discussion too. Like I really enjoyed it, and we talked about the topic of men's mental health. And I think we're even going to be kicking off like a monthly series with him and some other males talking about men's mental health. So stay tuned for that, and we'll announce some more whenever some more details come about. But this week we welcome Kelsey Beil. She's going to be sharing with us today how trauma impacts our sense of self in a very small nutshell for the sake of my introduction. So Kelsey, if you don't mind, go ahead and give us a little bit of an introduction, maybe describe your background a little bit in wellness.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having me today, Kelsey. I'm excited to be on here.
Right.
So I feel a little like I'm still a baby in mental health, and yet when I think about the years that I've been doing it, I realize I've been doing it a lot longer than I thought. So I have a background in clinical social work and specifically with individuals and families, and my experiences have been really vast. From working with women in the jail, to survivors of trafficking, to children in a behavioral center. And those have really given me these awesome tools and snapshots into trauma and the different ways people experience it and express it. And so that's kind of what I bring to the table, a lot of different experiences, even all across the country. I've lived in Colorado and Michigan and Washington State and Ohio. So I've also been able to see how seasons impact mental health, how where you live, your socioeconomic experience, the color of your skin. I've really gotten to see that how all those intersections impact trauma, and it definitely informs the work I'm doing. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about it today.
Yes, I'm so excited. You do some EMDR as well, correct? I think
I do, yes.
Yes, I thought so. So I've been super curious about it, even though I'm sure it'll come up in today's discussion, but I thought you did that as well. So, did you always, I get the question, and our listeners as well always wonder, like, did you just kind of gravitate towards, intensive trauma work, or like, what led you to kind of specializing in that, like as a part of just your overall role right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that some of it is just experience, whether it's personal experience or it's working with people. Trauma was so interwoven into the fabric of the work. So I would see these deep beliefs that people hold, these negative cognitions or these thoughts they have about themselves. And when we peel it back, it always traced back to trauma. And trauma is big trauma, little trauma, right? So it could be like a massive event that someone can point to, but it also can be just the tiniest wound that when it happened at the right moment in time, it saved it. So I think people mistake that trauma has to be some big life-altering thing. And it's really just, I would give the example, a 5-year-old left home alone, cries, and feels abandoned. A teenager left home alone throws a party. Where we are and how old we are when we experience something impacts whether or not we live.
Absolutely. I like that. I mean, Amanda and I, we use a lot of analogies or examples, and that's a good way of showing both sides of those different types. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. So just to jump in, can you go ahead and explain for us, what does it mean? What is integration when we talk about healing and engaging in therapy?
Yes, I was trying to think of how to succinctly say this. So integration, how I explain it to clients is it's us controlling what parts of ourselves will show up when. It's us being a whole person and kind of engaging with the world as our full self rather than our different parts reacting.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know Aaron Weinstein. So Aaron, a previous colleague of mine, he gave me the great example of it's a school bus. And it's us having all of our parts on the school bus. And when we lack integration, parts jump in the driver's seat and take over. So maybe we have our addiction part, or we have our 5-year-old part, or we have our protector part. And so what happens when we lack integration, they jump in the driver's seat when something happens, and they just go, 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 go. If we are integrated, we can see our bus as a whole and go, all right, who needs to be in the driver's seat right now?
We have more control over that.
Yeah, we get to say, oh, maybe it'd be good if our protective self and our compassionate self go sit in the driver's seat and talk to this child right now rather than our rager who's mad about something that happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a choice and it's awareness rather than a reaction to the world.
Okay. Do you mind me, and maybe this will fall into another question in a minute, but if it does, tell me that'll come up in later. But can you explain for our listeners what you mean by parts, or how parts of us are formed?
Yes, that's a great question. And even if it's another question, I think it's a great lead in. Mm-hmm. So there's the brainy kind of technical side is there's a therapy theory called internal family systems. Mm-hmm. And the belief is that, or the theory is that we have a bunch of subconscious parts that are acting or behaving on our behalf. And they're meant to be positive. They're doing something for us, right? So maybe the addictive part, for example, is helping us escape something we don't want, right? Mm-hmm. Its purpose is to protect us from things that are hurting us.
Right.
Maybe the rager part of us keeps people at bay.
Yes.
So they all serve us, and all they are, think about it wearing different hats, right? So you have your therapist hat, you probably have your student hat, you maybe have your wife's hat. But you don't want your wife's hat coming out at work, right?
Right.
So those are our parts. We have our child part. Maybe we have a 5-year-old part that constantly feels powerless or scared, right? We don't want that coming out when we're in the middle of maybe a work meeting where we have to make a big presentation.
Right.
So what happens is when we have trauma, those parts get fractured. Maybe we're never taught to be our whole self, so we learn to the parts that work will be the reasons for us, so we stay there. Mm-hmm. Maybe we saw examples of what parts are valued, and so we allow those to kind of run free and wild, even if we don't like them. Mm-hmm. And then our experiences. So our experience teach us what parts do work, don't work, protect us. We have all these things happening as we grow up and our brain and our psyche developing. And we're not really taught how to be kind of whole people. Mm-hmm.
So we I don't know if that's like the correct terminology, but we all have parts, regardless if we've been through big T trauma, little T. It's like we all naturally have parts, but then you add trauma in there and it can really impact those parts, or, kind of add more parts or alter things even more so.
Absolutely. I mean, think about something as simple as maybe someone has a part that's very compassionate and kind, but through trauma, they were taken advantage of or they were shut down. Someone could completely shut that part up. They could lock that part away in a room somewhere in their mind to protect themselves because it was abused and mistreated.
Yes.
And so, and that's the thing, our parts are not bad. Mm-hmm. Not a single part is bad. Mm-hmm. It's always communicating. So that's
okay. Oh, I love it. Okay, thank you. Do break. Okay, Kelsey. So you kind of touched on this, but maybe just in a little bit of a broader sense, why is integration of those parts so important for us? I know you said so that way we can show up, but I guess give us a little bit more of why that is so important.
So I think I initially said something like, then we have control over how we engage with the world. And I think that that's really important. But I think the first reason why integration matters is because when we become aware of our parts, we can start meeting our own needs.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start taking care of ourselves and meeting our needs and addressing those things because there's communicating, right? So if, for example, I know this sounds kind of odd and it's hard to showcase it in a podcast or video. So let's imagine that somebody has we'll go back to that 5-year-old part that feels really scared.
Mm-hmm.
So when that part doesn't have its needs met, it might take tantrums. It might hide. It might yell at people. It might, not engage. It might shut down, right? That kind of lizard fight or flight response brain kicks in. If we are in tune with our true self and look at that 5-year-old and go, oh, wow, you're scared. What do you need? Then you start to be able to go, oh, I think that I need to go take care of myself. Or I think I need to go be around safe people. Or I think that I'm in an unsafe situation because otherwise, why would 5-year-old me who feels powerless be triggered right now?
Mm-hmm.
So we ultimately get to start meeting our own needs. And then as we continue to meet those needs and take care of all of our parts, we then get to decide how we engage our world.
Right. So it really helps kind of decrease any dysfunction or unhelpful ways of getting needs met. Like having, like you said, like those outbursts or reacting on emotion instead of really going underneath of what is that part of myself telling me that I genuinely need. The way that presents looks a lot different when we're integrated.
Yes, when we're integrated. So integrated, if you think about your body, it's the sum of your parts.
Mm-hmm.
It's the difference between you're playing. So if you're unintegrated, you might be out playing soccer trying to kick the ball with your hands, right? If you're integrated, you're like, oh, I'm going to take a step and kick the soccer ball with my foot.
Yes.
Just that difference.
Right. And I liked how you said earlier, the parts, they're not good and bad. And the goal, by the sounds of it, is it's not to silence parts or to take parts away, or it's like you said a minute ago, communicating with them and bringing them together, kind of working together instead of against one another.
Absolutely, because I think there are sometimes our razor could really serve us well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's appropriate anger, and
absolutely
making sure it's coming out in a way that is appropriate and actually matches the situation.
Mm-hmm. It takes away that shame and guilt and like maybe not completely because we're human, but in a sense it helps take some of that away so we can actually see the need instead of all of this stuff that's getting presented instead of the need.
Yeah, I think it's a really compassionate response to what's going on with us, right? Mm-hmm. It acknowledges that because I think whether we need to or not, culturally kind of told to present a certain way, and when we present that way, we get shame and we have to shut it down and stop. We're not taught to stop and think, well, why did I do that? And what might I need in that? What was happening there? What was my body saying? What emotions came up? What thoughts or beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just go straight to wrong behavior, not received well, shut it down, move on.
These are the expectations. These are things that other people expect of us, and I have to suppress my own, essentially I have to suppress my own parts. We're suppressing them, but not integrating them. We aren't taught how to do that part.
We're not showing examples. It's not really toxic.
No, absolutely not. That's why I was so excited for today, because I was like, this is a different kind of perspective on things that I feel like not many, I mean, even just in general households, like no necessarily, no harm is necessarily meant, but it's just a generational thing that, we do what we know until we know better.
Yeah.
So it's good to know, for others moving forward, and if they have children, or just a trickle down effect of, oh, that's important. Like those parts are trying to serve us a purpose. We need to kind of tune into them.
Yeah, I do an exercise with clients. Sometimes it's called externalizing. And so it could be a part. So we could be talking about their 5-year-old self. We could also be talking about their anxiety part, right? Anxiety is a part of them. It's not them. We are not our anxiety. And so I have them actually pretend that anxiety has left their body and is sitting in a chair next to them. And I have them draw. I'm like, all right, what does it look like? So they draw it. And then we start asking it questions. So I say, okay, so what kind of things is anxiety saying? What does anxiety feel? Like, what does it itself feel? What is its goal? Like, what does it want? Does it want to protect you? Does it want to ruin your life? Like, what is it? And then we move forward to, well, what kind of things do you think it needs? And then I asked them, I was like, well, is there anything that you want to give to anxiety, or draw in your picture to, like, you now know what that's? And clients always, they're able to have compassion on their anxiety. They actually get to try to meet its need in that exercise. It's really fascinating. And we've externalized it. We've made it not their entire self, but just this part of themselves. It feels them manageable. So I love,
yes, it's so common. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay.
We can't, individuals, like when they come to a place, very often, not always, but they feel like they have just succumbed to their symptoms or those things that they're experiencing. So I love the externalizing aspect of that, but also they're looking at it in a, like we've said earlier, compassionate way, instead of focusing on, okay, this is me, this is causing this overwhelming impact on my life, and I have no control. It's a way of them treating themselves, essentially. It's like they're treating themselves with the things that they need in that exercise of, okay, what does it need? What's its goal? And because it is a part of us. So if we can pay attention to what it's telling us its goal is or its needs, then holy cow, I can do that.
Yeah. Yep. Or I can learn how, or I can get support, it becomes less this big thing.
Right? I like to have them draw and stuff too. I've done different, like with my own clients, like the drawing it and giving it its separate identity. I don't know if that, but it's, you're giving it this existence that's not just us. It's like, this is what it looks like. This is, and it takes a little bit of power from it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for people because we're talking about integrating, and part of integrating is actually looking at each individual part. So it seems almost counterintuitive, like they don't align. But it's almost like, if I could go back to the body analogy, the more that you understand what your hand can do and how it serves you, the more you can use it appropriately.
Yes.
So if you have awareness of if you don't understand its function, then we can't really use it. It might just do things on its own. So that's the best way I know how to explain it. It's just the more that we know and understand something, the better it serves us, and the more that it becomes an asset rather than something that's harming us.
And that in itself, just hearing that, like, that acceptance, like, okay, anxiety, if that was our example, it's a part of me. How can it, if it's a part of me, I can't, my goal is not to take it away or, to just, disown it or make it disappear. But how can I, have it serve me in a functional, healthy way?
Yeah.
That is just like, that's very powerful because mental health and those symptoms are very framed as burdens or something wrong with us or this or that. So like, you have to know, you can't expect yourself to be integrated and functioning if we don't know what is it that we need to be integrated right now.
Yeah, or if we just shut a part down because we think it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
If anxiety is bad and it just has to go away, well, then we essentially, to be graphic, lopped off a body part, right? Like,
right. Literally.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so for me, like, I know, what do I know? I know that anxiety helps me know what boundaries I need when overwhelmed and maybe have taken on too much, or I know that I don't like something that's happening in my life. Mm-hmm. Anxiety can serve me.
Yes, I love that. I have so many things swimming through my head right now, but I think it's a very powerful thing because it's like I am and I have all that I need right now. I just need to kind of organize it and integrate it a little bit.
Yeah, and figure out this. And so this is where EMDR for me comes in, is we have behaviors, or we have memories, we have reactions that are very charged. Mm-hmm. Right? I could see maybe a listener, somebody being like, well, the anxiety is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, how do I get it to the point where it serves me, right?
Right, yeah.
And so for me, that's a twofold in treatment. For me, that's skill building, mm-hmm. right? How do you set boundaries? How do you hold gray? How do you handle tension? And somebody doesn't like you, how do you decatastrophize things, right? So all that kind of stuff. But then there's also EMDR. EMDR is a therapy that literally helps rewrite pathways in your brain. Trauma gets stored in the wrong part of our brain. Mm-hmm. Trauma gets stored in the part of our brain that has no sense of time and is emotional, which is a great combination for trauma, right? Right. Mm-hmm. EMDR comes in and it moves your memories to the part of the brain that is rational, that understands the sense of time, understands that this is now, not then. Mm-hmm. I'm not in danger now. I might have been then, but I'm not now. So now I can react differently. So it takes the charge out. So imagine that when we have PTSD, trauma, anxiety, I mean, it's for tons of different disorders, but that we can approach situations without being charged and have skills to handle it, and we have an awareness of how to meet our needs. Imagine that we have all three of those together.
Oh my. I like feel myself relax and like I'm not even like, you hear that and it's like I can imagine that for so many people like struggling with feeling so overwhelmed by these things and it literally is changes in our brain, but we also have that neuroplasticity and this capability and these different types of treatments where you can do that. You can, kind of restructure things. It takes a minute because it didn't happen overnight, but because no sense of time. But you can, and you don't have to feel like you're just completely consumed by it or like feeding off of that charge from it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing to say confidently to clients. Like, if you do this work with it, like I can say that confidently. Mm-hmm. Hard work, it's not fun, you feel exhausted, and but you'll feel better and you'll have the skills to back up that feeling.
Yes. Oh, this is so great. Okay. So we kind of touched on this one a bit, but just what for listeners, what cause a lack of integration? What causes all of these parts to be just kind of serving a purpose, but not being integrated and causing us that kind of dysfunction?
That's, as I was thinking and preparing this, that's such a complicated question, right? So, because trauma fractures, we launch into our lizard brain, our fight, flight, freeze response. And so the parts, when trauma happens, they can't function there.
Mm-mm.
Right? So maybe our compassionate side or our playful side, like that can't function in survival mode. So
like,
that part, like,
can cause that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, no, you have to leave right now. Like, you're not welcome here. You're not a part that can be here. So definitely trauma. I also think there are parts of it that are just societally less valued. So maybe, for example, if we stick to kind of the heteronormative narrative that happens in culture, where men are not supposed to express feelings unless it's anger, right? So that could shut down an entire empathy part because it's not really welcome and valued. It's not fostered as when they're children, when they grow up, it's not valued. It's seen as weak, maybe not, right? That's a narrative that's given. And so we have things like that culturally that are happening. We may, something that's really interesting in my practice, I talk very openly about suicide with people. Well, people they're terrified of talking about it. People will think there's something wrong with them. They'll immediately be sent to the hospital. So we see these kind of compartmentalizations that people are doing to survive.
Yes.
So that's a big reason that people end up with a lack of integration. We're not taught how to be. I go back to, we're not taught how to be whole people.
No.
Even to take parts work out of it, like, we're not taught to pay attention to our body reactions paired with emotions, paired with our thoughts, right?
You're expected to just go, go, go. We're kind of programmed to not pay attention to those things because they might be not so helpful or convenient or whatever for other people or other situations, or it can range from somebody in a workplace to a child in a house of maybe there's domestic violence. We're not supposed to pay attention to those things. We're supposed to pay attention to all of these other things, and those parts, they stay there until they're always there, until we can reach that place of integration of, okay, these things are a part of me and I do deserve to, feel that sense of safety, to feel that sense of control in a healthy way.
Yeah, well, Dr. think you hit the nail on the head. Safety is a huge key. It's so hard to be integrated when you lack safety.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because that is saying that you deserve to love yourself and show up fully as you are, and that you're accepted in that.
Yes.
And that there's no shame in that. There's no shame in having a suicidal thought. There's no shame in, being afraid like a 5-year-old. There's no, that those are just acceptable things that are part of the human experience that are telling us what we need and how to help us navigate our world. And so if we don't have that safety to explore it, to question it, because that's, usually not integrated.
All right. And it's not a common thing for us to feel safe to actually to look at it, because it is, so many of these things are like a taboo or a thing that we don't like. We don't look at. If we don't look at it, it's not there.
Right.
But it's there, and it starts to present in other very unhelpful kind of ways until we take that shame and all of those, kind of aspects away and say, okay, kind of stripping it down and saying, if this is causing me these, and you have to figure out what, like, that's why it goes back to, like, you have to pay attention to and kind of unpack what parts are what parts telling me what. And it's such an interesting, I mean, I do parts and bits like in my own practice, so it makes sense to me. But for other listeners, that's why I was so excited for today, because I don't feel like it's framed this way very often, because people aren't taught this, like, on a, a common type of basis. So
yeah, it's we're not taught. And I love what you said there. You said our parts will come out one way or the other. They really will. And I think the parts that we deny a lot tend to come out in very disastrous ways. And that's why I think we get judgment on our parts, right?
Yes, 100%.
But it's just that they try getting their needs met the right way, and that didn't happen. So they're almost like demanding attention in a way.
You need to go to anger management, or, like, he's explosive, or like this, like an example of, like you said, those narratives that are given to somebody who is, behaving or, reacting instead of kind of tuning in. Maybe they tried to do that, but whatever happened along the way, and it wasn't safe to do that. So this is what I've learned to do. That's what my part tells me to do in order to get any even a part of that need met.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a really brave thing for us to start acknowledging our parts. It's also, I think, one of the most loving things we can do for ourselves. And it's interesting as I work with people, because it's, kind of a catch-22. As their self-esteem increases, they feel safer, more competent to engage their parts, right? Because it is an act of self-love. And as they continue to engage and give love to their parts, they also increase in self-esteem and confidence, because they know themselves better and they feel better about themselves, and they have this very deep compassion
for themselves that they probably never had, or even had probably modeled for them, even outside of themselves.
Correct.
Oh, this is so great. Okay, so, and another thing that always comes to my mind, I'm getting, not to get off on another thing, but safety. I feel like in our society, if we talk about feeling safe, I feel like that has kind of a generalization to it of my environment's unsafe. Maybe there's a lot of shootings or like something like that. And I'm like, no, like in our field, and I love teaching people that safety is a whole lot more than just physical or external or environmental safety. So it's like emotional safety, like, am I in a household where, because everybody thinks, like, if I wasn't physically hit, I wasn't abused, or, so I that this really touches on the multiple aspects of safety. And how do I create that for me in the present? How do I be in the present and have this safety need met? Because I'm not in those emotionally unsafe moments anymore.
Yeah, actually, I would love to hear because this actually comes up a lot for me. I have a lot of different people who like edit my blog posts and stuff, and they'll always be like, "Well, I know that like maybe your generation might get the word safety, but other generations like that means something different, or people." So, what would be your definition of safety for that would apply to kind of the whole range?
Mm-hmm. I'm not good at like giving like a succinct definition, but for me, like, my perception of safety is a sense of peace or like acceptance. Of I can kind of bring anything to the table, and I might feel a little bit anxious because that part of that's natural, but I feel like I have a sense that I can, like I said, bring anything to the table and feel heard, respected, and even get support.
Yeah, I like that.
I need, like, I just feel it's almost more of like a peaceful feeling that I envision for safety, instead of Because for some, I've heard, like, just my own client experiences, for them, in order to feel safe, it was modeled almost in like a violence. Like, you have to, be very aggressive or assertive to feel safe. And it's very interesting how people perceive that, and in what ways have they, needed safety needs met.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No,
What would you say? What was yours? I love that question.
I think, so I would echo all of that. I think if I gave a sentence, I would say the ability to be exposed and vulnerable without perceived consequences.
Yes. The consequence part, that reaction, whether that consequence is guilt, shame, or abuse, or having emotional feedback withheld, like that can make us feel unsafe. It's like, holy cow, I was just so vulnerable in this situation or with this person, and they blew me off. Or maybe they didn't shame you or like wag a finger, but they were kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how to sit with you in that. And to me, that's powerful, to have that feeling of like, okay, I'm acknowledging that I'm sitting with this, and if I need support, somebody else will, or like, yes, that vulnerability, and not feeling like we're going to immediately have some kind of consequence after it. Very good. Okay. So Amanda and I, even though Amanda's not here, but all of us are obviously fellow therapists. So, and I don't know, and even if in a general sense for listeners, I guess that might be two separate questions, but maybe we can make it a general kind of question. How do we help people work towards integration? If we need to answer that separately, we can. So as fellow therapists, maybe we can start there.
So I think,
concept. So I guess, where do you start with your clients?
Yeah.
Of your major starting points for them?
For therapists, I think it's one, always developing trust. Like, right, they have to have that safety in order to be vulnerable with their parts. I definitely have done research and some training in internal family systems, parts work. I have my really handy dandy parts work book that's illustrated and has really awesome examples of parts work. I love this book. So for me, I think as a clinician, that would be something I'd recommend. But I always really just start with like, that externalizing activity is always really good. If I notice someone's feeling a certain way, I'm like, how old does that feel like? And I'm like, oh, that feels like a teenager. And we just explore teenage them, and we really just start naming and identifying things. If I am not a clinician and I'm at home, I might start thinking about just starting to pay attention to reactions. Starting to recognize things where I feel like that wasn't my choice and how I reacted, or that reaction didn't serve me.
Right.
I'm a parent, and so I'm always thinking about things from a parenting perspective now. So, I think about it with kids. I would be like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, where do you feel that? What's happening here? What do you need? Or, but self-parenting is also a great way to start doing that. Like, hey, what's going on with me? What do I need? Where do I feel that? Like, what's going on? So it's really about raising awareness. And sometimes people can start, they can buy that Mindful Self-Compassion workbook. That's one that, or there's a book about self-compassion, of how to take care of our parts. There's getting into therapy and starting to explore them with someone who knows them. But definitely the practice of awareness paired with self-compassion, those are huge. We can go pretty far with it.
Those are good. I like those good first starting points. Like, even like you said, paying attention to our own reactions, and like you said, if you have a child, paying attention to that child's reaction. And because those reactions, if we can take away, like, we can kind of start to regulate ourselves and step back and say, okay, what's underneath that? What is there a need, or, what is the need underneath that? Just starting there, it helps you tune into that, to know, to start to learn those things.
Yeah, and I think validating, I always go back to like how we would teach a child is actually how we also teach ourselves, right?
The whole reading thing, and yes.
Yeah, if a kid's having a hard day and they're struggling, we would want to validate, oh, it seems like you're having such a tough day, what's going on? How can I comfort you? How can I care for you? How do I help you, right? Like, how do I help you get your needs met? What do you need? It seems like you need something.
Yes.
But when we have those big feelings, we're like, no. And so if we're able to help
other people have it worse, like, it's not that bad of a day. Like,
yeah. Well, at least nobody whatever today. Or, we have we're really good at downplaying and denying.
Yes.
And so that would be where I would start.
Do you mind for our show notes to tell me, like, the name of that workbook, like the one that you held up? I like to put resources out for people if they think that it was.
So this is Park Work, an illustrated guide to your inner life. And that is by Tom Holmes, Lori Holmes, and Karen Eckstein, or Eckstein, I'm not sure. There's a lot of different ones. I really enjoyed this one because it has kind of these illustrated examples. It kind of helps you get a feeling for bringing your parts to life.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And then you said, is there one you said for like a self-compassion book that you recommend to your clients as well? You don't have to have it to hold up, but.
It's Kristen Neff. I'm trying to see if I have it in here right now. Kristen Neff has a book and a workbook on mindful self-compassion. Okay. That's one that clinicians can do with clients. It's one clients or human beings can read for work themselves.
Like a self-help, like anybody can use it. They're not just a trained clinician. Excuse me.
Absolutely. It's really about like the difference between how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to our friends.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you. We'll put those in the show notes for sure. So, okay. Is there anything before we wrap up that we always ask our guests if there's any like last words or any kind of, some people have like a quote that they refer back to, or anything you want to leave our audience with before we wrap up today? Or a main takeaway you hope people get from this? That's another big one, some people say.
I think maybe a main takeaway or an insight, I would encourage all of us to just be curious. Mm-hmm. Curious about ourselves, our stories, our reactions, the impact we're having, the impact it's been had on us. Curiosity is our greatest strength and allows us to make choices in how we engage in the world. Mm-hmm. So that would be something. Curiosity.
I love that, because that just hits me. We're wrapping up, Kelsey. We're not getting into it. But this Kelsey, I wasn't saying that to you. I was telling it to myself, Kelsey. To me, so curiosity hits me in you're simply noticing, or you're looking into, you're exploring things. There's no judgment, there's no shame, there's no consequence, and I feel like we don't get to be genuinely curious. But with little kiddos or little us, that part, is very often very curious, very mindful, and very, present. So I think that's a perfect takeaway.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And we tell everybody, if you ever have something else and you want to come back and join us again, you know where to find me. So we're always down for people to just keep coming back, or if there's a whole other topic, or we can do a part 2. We're always excited to have people back. So, but again, thank you for being here with me today. Amanda will be back with us next week. She just wasn't feeling well. So next week, though, we will be talking with Jean Bowen. She's going to be bringing us the topic of women in leadership. So I'm really looking forward to that. And so, but don't forget to like, subscribe, share. If other people out there know someone, or you yourself would like to be a guest with us, just send us a message and we can get you scheduled. I think we're scheduling out to about March or April, I think April now. So for 2021, but if anybody else knows of anyone, and just make sure we're just trying to broaden our reach and get as much information out as we can. So thank you again, Kelsey, for being here with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
No problem.